Now to my final presentation, the Emerging Church Road to Babylon. Again, this information is taken from the book Faith Undone. And we've used this reference several times, but I would like to repeat Revelation 17, verses 1 to 5. There came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whorer that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast full of names of a blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. 2 Corinthians 11, 3 and 4. But I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your mind should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. For if he that cometh preacheth another Jesus, whom we have not preached, or if receive another spirit, which you've not received, or another gospel, which you've not accepted, you may well bear with him. So Paul's warning is clear. The gospel is simple. But there is a master deceiver who hates the gospel. There is another gospel, there is another spirit, and there is another Christ. And just as the church at Corinth was warned many, many years ago, so the church today should receive the same warning. But as we'll be demonstrating in this presentation, that is not the case. There's only a remnant of believers worldwide that take the Word of God seriously when it comes to the last days apostasy, which the Bible foretells. We need to beware of deception. Ephesians 6, 10 to 12. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. I thank God for his word, because it gives us insight and understanding. 2 Peter 1, verse 19. So we have the prophetic word made more sure, to which you do well to pay attention as to a lamp shining in a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star arises in your hearts. The word of God is like a lamp that shines into a dark place. Now, if we were to block all of the light that's coming in from outdoors and make this room black, if I were to light a match in the midst of the blackness, it would make quite a difference. Light in a dark place makes a difference. The light of God's word shone into the darkness of the deception that is taking place today in the world will help us to understand our times. What we know about Bible prophecy is this: all statements made about the future are 100% accurate. Many statements made about the future have already been fulfilled that we find in the scriptures. Other statements made about the future are in the process of being fulfilled. And statements made about the future not yet fulfilled will be fulfilled. Bible prophecy is very, very important. That was one of the major reasons why I was involved under the teaching of Pastor Chuck Smith for so many years. There's an emphasis on Bible prophecy. The current trends, things that were happening, how they lined up with the Word of God, particularly the emphasis on Israel. But since he's passed on, replaced, there's no longer an emphasis. In fact, from the pulpit just recently, an announcement was made. The emphasis on prophetic events is something which has happened here in the past. It's antiquarian. That means old-fashioned. Is that what the Bible teaches? Absolutely not. It's vital, it's significant, it's important to understand our times. Because if we understand what has occurred in the past in light of the Scriptures, we'll also be able to understand what's taking place today and where we're headed, past, present, and future. Jesus, when asked what it would be like at the end of the age, responded, Matthew 24, there would be tremendous deception. We've gone over those verses. Paul, 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 and 9. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. Falling away? Falling away from what? From the faith. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders. 1 Timothy 4, verse 1, the Spirit expressly says in the latter times, some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. In the last days scenario, Satan and the fallen angelic dimension, the demonic realm, will do everything that they can to deceive not only the world, but the church. Falling away from the faith. What is it? Biblical faith is trusting and believing in what God has said in His Word. Biblical faith comes by hearing the Word and acting accordingly. When one falls away from biblical faith for another faith, that's when apostasy occurs. Bible prophecy tells us that this is what to expect in the latter days. Our presentation yesterday was the Emerging Church Road to Rome. And I said today we would talk about another road, runs parallel. It's the road to Babylon. I believe what is happening in the world today is the formation of a global religion, a spirituality, that will end up being Christian Babylonianism. It will be in the name of Christianity, but it will incorporate Babylonian practices and ideas and beliefs. And that will be the theme of our message here today. Now, to present a background, I need to share with you a bit of my own personal journey. As I shared, I think, in this series, I told you my conversion, 1978, was when I came to the realization that everything that I had believed and taught others regarding the subject of origins and the history of life was a lie. Evolution. My conversion was from evolution to creation to Christ. I became a Bible-believing Christian, recognizing that there was a God who made everything and what this God had done, had sacrificed His Son. And simply reading the verse, John 3:16, my dad had written in the front of my Bible and given to me when I was 9 years old. Now I was 30 when I read it, and it made, for the first time in my life, sense. And I acknowledged who Jesus Christ was. And that was the beginning of the rest of my new life in Christ, and an adventure which has been incredible. In the mid-'80s, I started to see the connection between evolution and Eastern religion, the New Age movement. And I had the opportunity to work together with a documentary film producer and with another person I think some of you here know, Carol Matriciana. We co-authored the book, The Evolution Conspiracy. And the objective of the film and the book was to try to warn the church what was going on in the world. Eastern religion coming into the world. If you can see, those of you who are close, both Carol and I looked like teenagers not many years ago. By the way, please pray for Carol. She has cancer, and she's gone through a difficult time this year with a severe bike accident. Here's one of the books that we quoted in The Evolution Conspiracy. Peter Russell, The Awakening Earth, Roman numeral, page 7. We shall see that something miraculous may be taking place on this planet, on this little blue planet of ours. Humanity could be on the verge of an evolutionary leap, a leap which could occur in a flash of evolutionary time, and a leap such as occurs only once in a billion years. This is what many people were saying during the mid-'80s. I was at university studying theoretical physics, fascinated as I was by science. However, I was even more fascinated with my own mind and the mind of others. Western philosophy and psychology offered few insights into the workings of the mind. But I had felt for a long time that there was a vast amount of wisdom locked up in the East. In particular, various teachings on meditation. So I ended up spending a winter in the Himalayan foothills studying with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and experiencing dimensions to my consciousness of which I had never dreamed. As a result, I knew beyond any doubt that if everyone could contact such states of consciousness, the world would be transformed. Humanity could change its direction constructively rather than being changed destructively. And a couple more statements. Page 148. In transcendental meditation, TM, one of the most widespread practices in the West at present, the person sits down quietly and silently and repeats a mantra, which as far as TM is concerned is just a meaningless sound, although in some other practices the mantra may have a specific meaning. Page 149. Most types of Buddhism meditation also start with techniques aimed at helping the mind settle down. In some schools, particularly those of Tibetan Buddhism, this often involves visualization exercises, which again take the attention away from verbal thought. Other schools start with breathing exercises, which in addition to having a settling effect in themselves can also serve as a technique of passive attention, treating the rising, falling breath much like a mantra. Eastern metaphysical thought. This is what was sweeping the Western world. So we're trying to wake up the church. This is what's going on out there. It looks like we're being drawn into Eastern religion, Babylonianism. I never thought it would be possible that the church would end up on this road. But that's where it's gone and where it's going. So for the next couple of decades, continued to follow and research the New Age movement, which, by the way, this book here with the cover of the serpent on it illustrates it very well. Because the whole concept is anything and everything is God, that man can be God. That was Satan's lie in the Garden of Eden. It's based on the evolutionary assumption that man is at the top of the pile, that slime has arisen towards divine, but that man at the top of the pile hasn't finished the process of evolution. He's on his way up and beyond towards godhood. And that there are various means and methods and techniques that one can use in order to take this next step. The philosophy is everything can be God. Man can be God. And there's ways to reach this enlightenment through Eastern practices, meditation, out-of-body experiences, yoga, Kundalini yoga, which we'll see is called the serpent power. Over the next several years, as I traveled speaking various places, going to universities, I picked up countless numbers of books, which I'm just going to quickly go through. showing you how universities now were propagating this idea to students. When I was a student in university during the late 60s, well, God was dead. But there were people on campuses chanting Hare Krishnas, God is everything. By the time we were into the 80s and 90s, the Hare Krishnas philosophy was embraced by the professors who were teaching the students God is everything. An Eastern metaphysical worldview. Belief in astral projection, channeling, contacting the spirit world, creative visualization, using light and color to elevate human consciousness, the ancient science of geomancy, getting in harmony with the earth, the equinoxes, solstice ceremonies, pagan practices of the ancient world reintroduced into the present. Babylonianism. And it was global, whether you were in Germany or in Argentina or Chile or China or England or Japan or throughout the former Soviet Union, where I traveled many times from 1990 to 2000. Ukraine, Latvia, Romania, Kazakhstan, Russia. In Russia, there was an incredible vacuum. People had been told for so many years there's no God. Now they were willing to believe everything was God. Back to America. Gene Houston's book, The Possible Human, explains how absurd some of these things were. In a chapter entitled Exercises in Evolutionary Memory, we read, several years ago, those who witnessed the spectacle on the lawn of the University of California at Santa Barbara were a wriggling sea of bodies. 350 teachers, professors, physicians, psychiatrists, ministers, nuns, social workers, and other members of the professional establishment crawled over and under each other in a state of active reptilian regression, stared at one another and at me with total disbelief, yet this scene and similar ones have been now repeated hundreds of times. See, they were involved in this therapy, evolutionary memory, trying to go back and reenact what it was like at various stages of the evolutionary development. So they were crawling around like frogs and lizards in the grass. Notice these very intelligent, educated people. Many feel themselves to be part of an emerging evolutionary process, strongly motivated to go forward as committed and concerned participants now they've experienced their deep connections with the past. They express themselves as experiencing their spiritual dimension incorporated in a flesh that has become luminous, and their physical selves as being the embodiment of their spiritual evolution. By the way, Gene Houston was an advisor, spiritual advisor to Hillary Clinton when Bill Clinton was president in the White House. This became very popular. Many corporations who would have weekend retreats for employees to go and learn how to develop their creativity through the new science of mind and body. But this new science wasn't new. It was all based on ideas and philosophies that have already been repeated many, many times through Buddhism and Hinduism. Kundalini and the chakras, evolution in this lifetime is the title of this book. Gopi Krishna, Kundalini, the evolutionary energy in man. Kundalini is nothing more than the serpent power. You don't have to be a Bible scholar to understand what is happening, what took place during this period of history. It was in the early 90s, as I was traveling internationally, pointing people to the Creator, the evidence that the Genesis record is true, and warning them about evolution and the consequences, its connection to the New Age movement and how that related to Bible prophecy, that I started to see another major problem within Christianity. And that was Christianity that embraced extra-biblical experience. And so, for many years thereafter, I started to deal with that particular topic. It was the New Wine movement, the so-called Toronto Blessing, which I initially researched and authored a book called New Wine or Old Deception. In that book, we quoted Che On, who was a vineyard pastor at the time. He stated on page 22, although many have found this movement controversial, I've maintained it is either the biggest deception to hit the church in the history of the church, or it is the beginning of a great revival. He thought it was a great revival, and very few of us could see that it was great deception in the church. And it was setting up the church for delusion, which it has. Here's some of the books published by Guy Chevreau, who was one of the leaders in the Toronto Blessing. Catch the Fire. Notice the reference to the fire. Share the Fire. The Toronto Blessing and Grace-Based Evangelism. Notice the fire. Pray with Fire, interceding in the Spirit. I'm not going to take the time to show you this clip. You've seen it before, but hysterical behavior, laughing uncontrollably, shaking, behaving like animals, slithering on the floor like snakes. And they said it was the Holy Spirit. By the way, it came to Britain. Nicky Gumbel, who visited Holy Trinity Brompton, visited Toronto, came back to Holy Trinity Brompton, and it broke out there. Sandy Miller, who was the head pastor at the time. And throughout England. And I observed firsthand some of the services here. Now, speaking of Alpha, it came up yesterday. I just wanted to show you a few more things. A model for dynamic growth in the local church. And you see a number of endorsements there and supporters, well-known people like Jack Hayford, Charles Colson. Here's J.I. Packer. The Alpha Course is the most engaging way of passing on the basics of Christianity. Here is from Alpha literature an explanation of how to experience the Holy Spirit. Gumbel writes, physical heat sometimes accompanies the filling of the Spirit, and the people experience in their hands or some other parts of their bodies. One person described a feeling of glowing all over. Another said they experienced liquid heat. Still another described burning in my arms when I was hot, not hot. Fire perhaps symbolizes the power, passion, and purity of the Spirit God brings to our lives. This was brought up yesterday as well. Roman Catholic bishops applaud Alpha as course spreads through church. The Times, October the 5th, 2002, British newspaper. How Roman Catholics and evangelical Protestants are coming together. And in this article it mentions that Renario Cantamalessa, pastor to the Pope, was speaking at an Alpha conference, and he was teaching all the participants to understand Mary, the saints, the papacy. October 2003, Alpha News, Cardinals welcome for Alpha. Well, and this was a picture of Nicky Gumbel shaking hands with the Pope, agreeing to evangelize together. In this same article, page 24-25, beforehand, some of the people were in love with the idea of being in love with Jesus. This is what some of the experiences were in Catholic churches. That's the problem with sacramentalism sometimes. People get caught up lighting the candles, making a sign of the cross, kneeling, standing, genuflecting, doing this and that, and then getting caught up with this whole drama instead of thinking, why are we doing that? Now, it has so much meaning, and people are openly weeping at the stations of the cross and just getting lost in adoration and weeping at Mass. So the Alpha program really brought some life into the Roman Catholic Church. Nicky Gumbel states, it was a great honor to be presented to Pope John Paul II, who has done so much to promote evangelism around the world. We have been enormously rich by our interaction with Catholics in many countries. The Toronto Blessing also spread to many other locations, South America, the Rising Revival. This book again depicted with fire. Then the portal in Pensacola. Notice the fire. Pensacola, Florida. There it was called the river. The holy fire. America on the edge of revival. Michael Brown. Notice the fire. The visitation. The Brownsville revival. Kathy Wood. And previously I've showed you this clip. Maybe we'll just look at a small portion of it.
And on the way home, my parents live in Birmingham. On the way home today, I was listening to Steve Hill's message about how, on his testimony, on the very back of that tape, there's a song, and I was there for that message, and it was Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. And it rang in my car, and I was shaking all the way down the highway, and my God has set me free. Yes. Thank you, Jesus.
In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
As you can see, very abnormal behavior in the name of it. This is what many of the leaders were calling it. You can receive it. It was a transferable anointing. You could get it, and then you could take it and give it away. So what was it? There's only one way to understand this. This is not the Holy Spirit. But if we look in literature, like this book here, The Stormy Search for Self by Christina Groff, Stanislaus Groff, who were psychotherapists, they state on page 78, 79, individuals involved in this process, that's Kundalini therapy, might find it difficult to control their behavior. During powerful Kundalini energy, they often emit various involuntary sounds and their bodies move in strange and unexpected patterns. The Kundalini, the serpent power, can be transferred. Notice on the front cover, the fire and the phoenix. Catch the fire. Catch what? The serpent power. The wiles of the devil. When I shared this information and the book was published, nearly the entire fellowship that I'd been involved with in Canada no longer wanted to have anything to do with me. Not all of them were involved in it. But they said, we don't know if it's the Holy Spirit or not, and if it is, we don't want to miss out. And especially, we don't want to be divisive and stand up against those of our brothers who are in it. Very few would stand up and explain what it was. Now, with that as a background, as I already told you, my introduction to the emerging church was my research into the area of Roman Catholicism and now ancient Babylonianism. And I could see it entering the church. The emerging church is a bridge back to Babylonianism, Roman Catholicism as well. Here's a book called Quantum Spirituality, author in 1991 by Leonard Sweet. Remember I showed you this picture yesterday of Leonard Sweet's book, Soul Tsunami, God's Birthing the Greatest Spiritual Awakening in the History of the Church. What did he say in Quantum Spirituality? This guy, Leonard Sweet, is one of the major proponents of the emerging church philosophy, theology. Page Roman numeral 8, he said, I have followed these new light leaders, as I am calling them, from varying distances. But it is largely because of their writings and lives that I've been compelled to join Abraham on the journey. They are my personal role models. In an earlier day, one would get away with heroes, of the true nature of the postmodern apologetic. More than anyone else, they have been my teachers in how to translate without compromising content the gospel into the indigenous content of the postmodern vernacular. Now, a lot of big words there, but let me summarize what he said. He has learned something from New Light leaders. New Light leaders? What does he learn? He's learned how to present the gospel, as he calls it, in the language that will reach the postmodern generation, who we said yesterday are hungry for experience. When he listed some of the New Light leaders, when I read the introduction to his book, I couldn't believe it. Some of these New Light leaders that he was talking about were the people that we were researching and writing about, trying to expose the New Age movement. For example, Matthew Fox. This was who Leonard Sweet said he learned so much from, and many others that he listed were people we were aware of as well. Matthew Fox, former Jesuit priest. In his book, The Coming of the Cosmic Christ, notice there, the cosmic Christ holding the planet Earth. This is going to be a Christianity that will embrace the entire earth, anyone and everyone. Page 5. I foresee a renaissance, a rebirth based on a spiritual initiative, to use historian M.D. Chenow's definition, as a result of the outpouring of the Spirit. This new birth will cut through all cultures, all religions, and indeed will draw forth the wisdom common to all vital mystical traditions in a global religious awakening I call deep ecumenism. Now, in case you haven't caught it, let me repeat it. Leonard Sweet is saying that a New Light leader like Matthew Fox has got tremendous insight brought into his understanding, so now that we can reach the younger generation with a new Christianity. But it isn't new. And it certainly can be understood in light of the Scriptures. The coming together of the historical Jesus and the cosmic Christ will make Christianity whole at last. Christianity has been out of touch with its core, its center, its sense of mystical practice and cosmic awareness. Perhaps a new ecumenical council will be forthcoming in our lifetime. This one would be deeply ecumenical and would call forth the wisdom of all the world's religions. Another book, Creation Spirituality. Notice the front cover. A serpent surrounds three ladies. According to the artist who designed the cover for Matthew Fox, the serpent represents the oneness of life, evolution. The three ladies represent the female trinity of God. If I had time, I'd describe to you the lady at the top. She's dressed in purple and scarlet. As a movement, creation spirituality becomes an amazing gathering place, a kind of watering hole. All religions can come together. Governments can come together. Scientists can come together. People of all faith traditions. Creation spirituality. In the book of Romans, chapter 1, the Bible says that creation spirituality is the result of not worshiping the Creator. You begin to worship everything as God, but not the one who made everything. You worship the sun as God, the moon as God, the earth as God, and all other things as God. It's as old as history. Babylonianism. And Leonard Sweet says this gave him such insight with regards to reach the postmodern generation. Page 1, the Christian mind is failing to comprehend the times, our times. The New Light apologetic chronicled in this book is devoted to enfranchising and energizing Christians to connect their faith with the indigenous historical place in which God has placed them to live. Page 76. Mysticism, once cast to the sidelines of the Christian tradition, is now situated in the postmodern culture near the center. And then this statement, page 7. The emergence of this New Light apologetic is a harbinger and a hope that a new age-old world is aborting in the church, even that the church may now be on the edge of another awakening. Amidst all the cliff-hanging circumstances and conditions of the church, the Spirit is at work. All around there is evidence that the church is learning to dance a new rhythm. The New Light movement is characterized by bizarre, sometimes anxious alliances of a ragbag assortment of preachers, theologians, pastors, professors, artists, scientists, business leaders, and scholars. What ties their creative piracy together is a radical faith that is willing to dance to a new rhythm. Notice he said an assortment of preachers and pastors. Here's one. The tides of change, riding the next wave in ministry. Leonard Sweet and Rick Warren, 1995. So these ideas that I've been reading to you about an ecumenism that will unite all religions, all faiths, it's embraced by Rick Warren many years ago. But where did the idea come from originally? This man here, you may not know him, I'll tell you who he is. It's Peter Drucker. He's now dead, but for years he was known as well-known corporate growth guru, consultant. And then he started to have an influence in a number of church leaders. He wrote a book, 1995, called Landmarks of Tomorrow, in which he laid out the future where the world was headed, politically, economically, and religiously. He called it the three-legged stool. I call it the 666 plan. It's a repeat of what occurred in Babylon. Satan has a plan for man in the last days to deceive the world and the church, to reconstruct the Babylonian plan for man, to bring back mankind together again. The God of this world, Satan, wants to be the king. There will be a global political system, there will be a global economic system, and there will be a global religious system. It's a three-legged stool. Rick Warren didn't invent that idea. Peter Drucker did. A partner to Peter Drucker was this man here, Bob Buford. Peter Drucker and Bob Buford formed what was called a leadership network, in which they pre-planned how they would influence the church, particularly megachurches and publishers. In incorporating some of these ideas, the very ideas that Leonard Sweet was talking about through various writers, authors. One of them was Brian McLaren. As I read before to you from his book, Generous Orthodoxy, many Christian leaders started searching for a new approach under the banner of spiritual formation. This new search has led them back to the Catholic contemplative practices and medieval monastic disciplines. The Generous Orthodoxy, more ready to realize the church on the other side, the last word and the word after that, a tale of faith, doubt, and a new kind of Christianity, a new kind of Christian. Some of the other books that McLaren has written, The Secret Message of Jesus, uncovering the truth that could change everything. There were a number of people mentored by Peter Drucker. One was Robert Schuler. And he incorporated his style of church growth. Crystal Cathedral, which, by the way, has been, well, he just passed away last week. The church, there was a family feud, dispute, and the church essentially went bankrupt, and now the church is owned by the Orange County Catholic Diocese. Another person mentored by Peter Drucker is Bill Hybels, seeker-friendly Willow Creek Community Church. And that style, seeker-friendly Christianity, was marketed into countless numbers of churches in Canada, the United States. The third person who's very influential that was mentored by Peter Drucker is Rick Warren. He stated in an interview with Michael Ireland, January 9th, 2007, the third leg of the stool is the churches. He's talking about the three-legged stool. There's a public sector role, there's a private sector role, and there's a faith sector role. The third leg, he said, is the churches, and then he describes the third leg as the faith sector role. Other key players promoting the emerging church. Here's a book called Emerging Churches, Eddie Gibbs, Ryan Bolger, page 131. Christians cannot truly evangelize unless they are prepared to be evangelized in the process. In sharing the good news, people are enriched by the spiritual insights, honest questions, and depth of devotion demonstrated by those of other faiths. Including others involves listening to them, learning from them. Much of what exists in other faiths may not necessarily be hostile to the kingdom. Christians can learn a lot from other walks of life. Emerging Manifesto, Samir Silvanovic, page 194. Is our religion, that is Christianity, the only one that understands the true meaning of life? Or does God place his truth in others too? Well, God decides, not us. The gospel is not our gospel, but the gospel of the kingdom of God and what belongs to the kingdom of God cannot be hijacked by Christianity. Church Reimagined, Doug Paget. I mentioned him the other day. Don Kimball, the Emerging Church, we mentioned him the other day. These are some major leaders. Here's another one. Tony Jones, Spiritual Practices for Everyday Life, the Sacred Way. What is the Sacred Way? Well, a book published by Zondervan, page 16. I voraciously read authors and books that didn't assign in seminary. St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, and Pilgrim's Way. I met with other Protestants, with Roman Catholics, with Eastern Orthodox Christians. I took a long hike in the Red Mountains of Utah with a shaman. I introduced my email with people around the world, and I talked with others about prayer over the phone. A shaman? A witch doctor? What would you learn from him? Page 16, 17. For years, I'd been told that to be a Christian meant I had to do three things: read the Bible, pray, and go to church. But I had come to the realization that there is something more, and indeed there is. For me, there is incredible richness in the spiritual practices of ancient and modern Christian communities from around the world, incorporating new ways of praying, meditating, reading the Bible. I have fueled my faith and passion for spirituality in many ways I never thought possible, and have without question brought me into a closer relationship with God. The Jesus Prayer. So seated comfortably in a dimly lit room, attend to your breathing. And then begin the prayer, and with your breathing, breathe in the Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. Breathe out, have mercy on me, a sinner. Guarding the mind against all distractions, the prayer focuses during every repetition on the meaning of the words, praying them from the heart and in the heart. In order to keep track of my repetitions, I use a prayer rope. Most are made in monasteries in Mount Athos in Greece with 100 knots. Each knot is tied with 9 crosses. Every 25 knots is a bead. So the Lord's Prayer can be recited, and at the end I say the Apostles' Creed. A prayer rope. Where would he get that idea? Well, here's a Buddhist monk I took a picture of with his beads. Prayer beads. Count the repetitions. Get into an altered state of consciousness. Hindu use prayer beads to get into altered states of consciousness, repeating phrases over and over again repetitively. Muslims use prayer beads. And of course, Catholics use prayer beads. It's amazing what you can pick up on the internet. Like the Jesus Prayer, centering prayer grew out of the reflections and writings of the Desert Fathers. Unlike Jesus Prayer, it's a repetitive prayer is not used. The prayer is encouraged to choose a simple monosyllabic word like love or God. When the mind is distracted, the word is used to bring back the mind into focus on God. The Desert Fathers, I mentioned yesterday, hermits and monks who lived in the 3rd century in Egypt. Tony Campolo. Letters to a Young Evangelical. This book is for young evangelicals. He said Paul wrote to Timothy and taught Timothy, and now it's time to upgrade the book of Timothy for this generation, the postmodern generation. He said, in my case, intimacy with Christ had developed gradually over the years, primarily through what Catholics call centering prayer. Each morning, as soon as I wake up, I take sometimes as much as a half hour to center myself on Jesus. I say his name over and over and again to drive back the 101 things that begin to clutter my mind. The minute I open my eyes, Jesus is my mantra, as some would say. The constant repetition of his name clears my mind, but the awareness of his presence. Oh, I've already said that, sorry. Page 30. I learned about the way of having a born-again experience from reading Catholic mystics, especially the spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola. Ignatius, a founder of the Jesuit order, was once a soldier, and it was only when he spent a long time in a hospital bed recovering from a battle wound that his heart and mind focused on God. Like most Catholic mystics, he developed an intense desire to experience a oneness with God. Gradually, he came to feel an intense yearning for the kind of spiritual purity that he believed would enable him to experience the fullness of God's presence within. Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, the spiritual exercises of Ignatius. That's how Tony Campolo says he was born again. After the Reformation, we Protestants left behind much that was troubling about Roman Catholicism of the 15th century. I'm convinced we left too much behind. Then, the book, Lost Virtues of Happiness, Discovering the Disciplines of the Good Life, J.P. Moreland, Klaus Isler. What did they say in their book? Go to a retreat center that has one of its purposes the provision of a place for individual sojourners. Try to find a center that has gardens, fountains, statues, and other forms of beautiful artwork. In our experience, Catholic retreat centers are usually ideal for solitude retreats. We also recommend you bring photos of your loved ones, picture of Jesus, or gaze at a statue of Jesus, or let some thought, feeling, or memory run through your mind over and over again. This man here has probably caused more of the propagation of Eastern metaphysical thought than anyone, Richard Foster, and the propagation of spiritual formation in his book Celebration of Discipline, which almost every pastor has in his library. Richard Foster writes, Thomas Merton was perhaps done more than any other 20th century figure to make the life of prayer widely known and understood. His interest in contemplation led him to investigate prayer forms in Eastern religion. So it's no secret. Zen masters from Asia regarded him as the preeminent authority on their kind of prayer in the United States. Zen masters regarded Thomas Merton as an expert, and Foster recommends Thomas Merton, recommends Zen Buddhism, the monastic vision, contemplative prayer, well, or is it contemplative terror? Because Foster writes in his book, Prayer Finding the Heart's True Home, page 157, I want to give a word of precaution. In the silent contemplation of God, we are entering deeply into the spiritual realm, and there's such a thing as supernatural guidance that is not divine guidance. While the Bible does not give us a lot of information on the nature of the spiritual world, we do know there are various orders of spiritual beings, and some of them are definitely not in cooperation with God in His way. For now, I want to encourage you to learn and practice prayers of protection. All dark and evil spirits must now leave. So before you enter into this contemplative prayer, pray a prayer of protection because you might contact a demon. He's right. You will. But it's being recommended by the emerging church leaders. It's nothing more than Eastern religion, Babylonianism. This is Xuan Dagon, Myanmar. city of Yangon, where I travel once or twice a year, have since 2006. 95% of the population Buddhist. This place, I would have to say, is the most demonic place I've been anywhere in the world. By the way, notice it's a tower into the heavens. At the top of that tower is a large diamond. The people are in absolute poverty, but these Buddhists collect money. That's gold-plated. You can see it all over the city. But the big diamond, one of the biggest diamonds in the world, there is a Buddhist monk staring up at the sun at noontime with his eyes open. And he's counting his repetitions. This guy's kneeling in a yoga position, counting his repetitions. I talked to this Buddhist monk. I said, what is the purpose? He said, oh, well, we meditate so, we have this potential to reach another level of consciousness, and next time we die, come back as a higher being. The country is absolutely full of this. But Westerners go there, like this lady here, and she's given the god of Monday a bath statue. Notice the candles. I call it the emerging church. The bells that are ringing and the incense is burning. There's Dagon. Dagon, by the way, was the god of the Philistines. While I'm in Yangon, I always go by this location. It's a major Catholic church in the city of Yangon. And I'm amazed at the parallels, the statues that people bow down and pray to, made of ceramics. And they count their repetitions as they do the rosary, just like the Muslims that I see everywhere else. Richard Foster says God is doing fresh things among us, and RENOVARÉ is committed to following these movements of the Holy Spirit. First, God is breaking down the old walls that separate and isolate us. We are being enabled to listen and learn and draw strength from each other in ways that have not been possible for a very long time. RENOVARÉ seeks to follow this powerful movement of the Spirit of God by bringing together the best spiritual treasures of several great Christian streams of faith and witnesses, should I say, non-Christian streams as well. Now let me conclude. The emerging church, without question, is a path to Rome. The emerging church, without question, is a path to Babylon. The Bible proclaims that the last days will be characterized by an apostasy. What do you suppose apostasy would look like? The Spirit expressly says that in the latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. 1 Timothy 4:1. What do you suppose doctrines of demons would look like? I think we've been looking at. I believe we're living in the most significant period of history that the world has ever known. 2 Timothy 1 verse 8. Know this, in the last days perilous times shall come, for men will be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women, laden with sins, led away with diverse lusts, ever learning, never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Now as Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, so do these also resist the truth. Jannes and Jambres, remember them? They turned wood into the serpent in front of Moses. Satanic signs and wonders. Paul is comparing what will happen in the last days with the abilities of Jannes and Jambres. So these also resist the truth, men of corrupt minds, reprobate concerning the faith. Revelation 18, 4 and 5, and I heard another angel, or another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that you will not be takers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues, for her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities." Come out of her. Now, does it make sense? I'm grateful that God has put me on this journey for the last 35 years so that I can see the progression. I'm sad when I see how many people are being caught in the trap. And what is even more troubling is that how few people want to even pay attention to what's happening. The Emerging Church, Road to Rome. Emerging Church, Road to Babylon. Let's pray. Lord, the evidence speaks for itself, but your word shines light into the darkness so that we can understand where we are in history and in church history. These things should not be a surprise to anyone who trusts and believes in your word, because you've written it down beforehand. Your word is like a light unto our path. It shines into the darkness, and it reveals Satan's strategies. Lord, thank you for your word and your spirit. And Lord, I pray that for many, those that perhaps not only they're here but may watch this later, that the light of that word will light up their lives and they will understand and be encouraged to tell others, to be evangelists of the truth. We live in desperate times, but Lord, this is a great time to be able to take the truth to those that are deceived. So help us, Lord, encourage us to do that. In Jesus' name, amen.